Moving right along here on the Ostrom Avenue podcast, we have the pleasure of being joined by Syracuse.com football beat reporter Emily Leiker. There's a lot that has changed over the last year, Emily, and fall camp last year compared to fall camp this year. I guess what's the biggest changes that you've noticed from the Dino Babers era through the spring into the summer that's now being incorporated in the Fran Brown era of Syracuse football?
Yeah, I think we talked about it a lot in the spring, just the energy around practice and how much faster paced it is. There's not a big break when the media leaves. There's not walking between drills. Like if you're not running, you're getting yelled at. Um, Getting to talk to coordinators after practices and assistant coaches obviously is one of the big changes and has been great through fall camp, especially when you're trying to figure out the depth chart and now, they're not always super open about it. Like the other day, Nick Williams was out here saying, well, there's no depth chart for the D line. It's just everyone's playing. But like it's still nicer to hear like who a position coach thinks is breaking out at that position than just the head coach. Because like, I mean, we've seen Fran at practice, like he's mostly with the cornerbacks. And though I know that he probably has a better read on the whole team than Dino ever did, just based on the answers Dino would give us and the answers Fran gives us. It's still nice to be able to ask like Ross Douglas, like, hey, who do you think are the wide receivers that are breaking out this fall and could make an impact in the season? So, I mean, I'd say those are the two big things, and I mean they're really the same things from spring, but like you want that consistency, right? Like you want what was happening in the spring to be happening in the fall to be happening into the season. So yeah, the energy and then the access has pretty much remained the same.
Yeah, Emily, I think everyone's kind of said that like how much different Fran Brown is energy wise and tempo wise. But one thing that's kind of really been on my mind, and I know we can't know the answer of this until an actual game, but does he know his X's and O's? Like, what is his actual like coaching ability? Because he hasn't been a head coach before. He's always been a position coach.
Yeah, well, I think he's a very intelligent guy. You can just tell that based on the way he talks about teaching his players and he's a lot better at like if we ask specific questions, like he'll give you a specific answer about like I know we've asked before, like, what are you working on with the cornerbacks there? Like, what's that drill you're doing? And he's like, oh, well, we're talking about eye placement and where they need to be looking and stuff like that. So he's really intelligent. But, I think the key to his success as a first year coach this year is actually going to be how collaborative he is because he's built this really smart staff around him, some of whom do have play calling experience, some of whom do have coordinator experience, who come from all of these different levels in football. And he hasn't been shy about like working with them and like letting them take the reins on stuff and just turning things over to them and giving them credit and stuff like that. And again, like that's something like at least publicly, it didn't feel like was happening with Dino. I mean, like we went through the whole debacle in November last year where we're trying to figure out who scripted that pit game. And Dino wouldn't tell us. Like he was just like, oh, it was everyone. And like I find out later, like it was mostly Jason Beck. So like props to Jason Beck, offensive coordinator at the time. But like I'd like to think if that happened this year, like Fran would be out here telling us exactly who made that plan up. And so I think like his willingness to collaborate and not like have to be the one who has the final say on everything all the time is really going to be what propels him through like some of those like natural bumps that come being a first year head coach.
I thought it was even funnier last year in terms of the scripting of the pick game. It was the question was asked, was it done out of need or was it done because it was, trying to change up the offense to try to get something going? And even that wasn't necessarily answered in full. Something that definitely would not have happened last year was the ACC All Access to the team and to see kind of the behind the scenes stuff. Obviously, it's not going to be fully, hard knock style, getting in everywhere. But what have kind of been your general thoughts or what stuck out most from the two episodes so far in the ACC All Access series?
Yeah, I think it's nice that they've taken time to like show a little bit of different sides of everyone, especially that's really what this second episode did, right? You get like Barron and McCord on the golf course, which like we hear about Barron being a good golfer all the time. I've gone out, I was there that day at Tuscarora because they were doing an NIL event. So like I've seen Barron like he's better than he was in that clip golfing, but like you get to see that, you get to see like Jack and Brady and you get to see Fran go out with his kids. So like I think it's been really nice kind of to show like a wider audience those different sides of the team and the players. I think the shoe burning ceremony was really interesting and like a great start to the season. Like it was a really good tone setter for that first episode and kind of set the table for okay, what is Syracuse trying to do this year and like why did we choose to come here? I'm really interested to see how the third episode goes, just because like I believe yesterday or today was their last day filming. And so like they don't have, at least to my knowledge, like some big event that they can cap it with because they left before the first game. They left before likely the first meetings on Sunday for the game. So I'm curious like what they use as like the closing event and kind of the story arc of this third episode. But um it's been fun so far. I mean, it hasn't been super newsy for us. I think those of us who are around the team often feel like, okay, like this is just kind of a fun watch, like in the evenings, and obviously some of us get to see ourselves, which is fun. But I think for the general fans, like it's a really nice kind of portrait of the team and what they're trying to do.
At Syracuse.com, is there like a little like, table you guys got of how many mentions you'll have in each episode or something like that?
No. I had teased like before the first episode came out. I mean, they were at ACC kickoff, which I was at too, and so like one point, like when I first got there, like Fran came up to me and like we said hello and like he fist bumped me and stuff, and camera was like right there. So I was like, you guys, like if they do stuff from kickoff, like I might be in that. And so when that passed, I was like, oh, I'm probably not going to be in it. And like they had already kind of gone through the first day, so I was like, they're not going to go back to the first day press conference, like but then we got tipped off that we were going to be in it, that I was going to be in it, and then Brent's voice was in it there asking Kyle McCord a question. So no betting because we knew he had insider knowledge.
I was gonna say Brent was very excited that his voice was on it. You got the cameo appearance fully in there from, was that the first day in the auditorium?
Yeah, that was that Wednesday press conference we had the day before the first day of camp. Yeah.
Awesome. I think on switching over to the offensive side, a lot of things have changed. Kyle McCord in at quarterback. And I think the biggest difference, other than the quarterback position on the roster this year, has to be at wide receiver. There's so much depth. There's so many names on that list. How important is the depth going to be at wide receiver this season, given the fact, Kyle McCord, the pro style offense with Jeff Nixon?
Yeah, depth at wide receiver is interesting to me because you want to have a broad variety of targets, right? Especially like late in the season, once kind of teams like zone in on, okay, like, hey, these are one or two guys that we're going to try and double, triple team. Like we saw that happen to Gadsden at the end of 2022. Um, but at the same time, like a quarterback just naturally develops stronger rapport with some wide receivers than others. So you do have like 3 to 4 guys typically who kind of really emerge at the top of the pack, and then 1 or 2 who are even like farther above the other two. And so like it's definitely important, and I think it'll be interesting to see like how they use all these different guys. Like we've learned a little bit, like right, like Yazid Haynes is the speed guy. Like he's going to be the deep ball guy. They're not going to. I mean, they're not. I'm not going to rule it out completely, but they're going to choose to go to Yazid Haynes deep over like OG deep or like Jackson Meeks deep. And like Pena is going to be like short distance guy because he's a slot receiver, right? So I think the interesting part of the depth will be like seeing how they like balance everyone's talents, and if like McCord can like truly have enough chemistry with everyone to like be consistently getting the ball to like up to six people, I'd say, because I think right now probably the top six, not including Gadsden because he'll be at tight end. I would say are Meeks, Haynes, Hatcher, Pena.
I know Justice Ross Simmons has been off to the side a lot of
Yeah,
camp.
Justice Ross Simmons is probably in there. It's so hard because we haven't seen him in 2 weeks. And then Daryl Gill Jr. I think are probably those top six, and you got like a pretty decent like size mix in there, talent mix. So I think seeing how those guys are balanced and whether Kyle can build enough chemistry with all six to distribute kind of evenly will be interesting to see.
Yeah, I'm really excited with the 2 Georgia transfers. I think they're going to make a real big impact. And I think it's the kind of style of receiver that Syracuse hasn't had in a while. But if they want to get the ball, and if the Syracuse offense wants any success, I think the offensive line needs to be healthy and playing at its best ability. Last season, it wasn't healthy. There was a lot of injuries. Has this team gotten enough depth on the O line to, if injuries come up, there'll be suitable replacements?
Yeah, I want to say yes. I generally think I feel better about the second string, or like the guys we've seen in that second string, than I have in previous years, partly because several of the guys who are second string now are starters from last year. So they at least have game reps, like actual game reps, and not like end of a blowout against Colgate game reps, like some of the O line last year. Um, but I mean, even like the first string, I just think is so strong. And like again, it's always like if they stay healthy, if they stay healthy, but like if they stay healthy, like that first string should be able to carry throughout the whole season. I mean, I think Reed was already good last year. Like I remember that like through like the at least the first half of the season, like there was like just only one bad snap that I can remember. Like I remember actively commenting like the first time a bad snap happened, like, oh, like that's the first time Reed's done that. Like that was super weird. Like he was really consistent. Petrie, I think, has gotten a lot better, and they shifted him inside, which I think will be a better spot for him than out at right tackle. Bradford has been a multi-year starter, so he's an experienced guy. And then you got the 2 transfers out on the outside who they brought in to play on the outside and protect Kyle McCord from those edge rushers that are going to be coming to get him. Savion Washington, I mean, anyone who's seen him at practice knows how huge he looks. And then Demetrius Weatherspoon, like, we heard he had to drop 30 pounds. He asked for that role. So I, I can confidently say the O-line's in a better place. Again, the overarching question is always if they stay healthy, but I can say they are in a better place overall, and I think it would take more to cause the catastrophe that we have seen the past 2 seasons.
As a Jets fan, I definitely know what if stays healthy means for a football season. Something to kind of help that offensive line would be establishing the running game, getting that good running game can translate into that play action pass. Jeff Nixon obviously is coach running backs at the NFL level. You get LaQuinn Allen, Yassine Willis, Will Nixon. He said he's going to play about 3 to 4 running backs kind of throughout the season. What's kind of your read on that group? Obviously, LeQuint is going to be that number 1 guy, and then Will Nixon, Yassine Willis kind of behind them.
Yeah. I mean, LeQuint's number 1. We heard in All Access actually, like Fran say something like, "We want 1,500 yards out of you." I think most people are hoping, expecting for over 1,000 again from him. And then I think Will and Yassine are probably like a 2A, 2B situation where they're gonna pretty evenly swap reps. I think there's situations in football where you want an older veteran like Will Nixon to go in rather than a guy like Yassine, even though like physique wise, like Yassine might be the guy that you think you would put in there. And then if they go up to 4 backs, like Nixon kind of said, they might like. It seems like Jaden Hart's kind of the guy that's coming in behind. That's another true freshman. So we'll see if they get into using him at all. But I think the big thing about having such a strong 1, 2A, 2B in that running back room is that LeQuint's going to get so much more rest than he did last year. And I mean, granted, like as far as we knew, he stayed healthy all year last year, despite his usage and at the end of the season being asked to do a million different things. But it's going to be a lot easier for him to repeat 1,000-yard rushing season, push for 1,500 yards when he doesn't have to be on the field every single snap. And I know that might sound counterintuitive, but like you need rest in football. Like playing every snap is not good for you, even if it pads your stats. Like I just think it's going to be so much easier for him this season, and so that opens up the door for him to do a lot more. Like I think we'll see a lot more breakaways. We'll see a lot more broken tackles, like just big plays from him that towards the end of the season last year like weren't necessarily as common because he was having to do all the work 24/7.
For Yassine Willis, we saw a lot of him in episode 2. Do you think he'll have the kind of role that LaQuint Allen had the year before Sean Tucker left, where it was kind of
Yeah.
goal line?
Yeah, I would say so. I think that's a good kind of projection. And, I think he's someone that they could use. We've seen him with some short yarded catches like we saw LaQuint that season and have seen him since then. He has his frame is similar to LaQuint's, is more similar to LaQuint's than Will's is. Will's a little shorter and stockier. He seems, I think, like an inch or two taller than LaQuint, but otherwise they're built pretty similarly. And so, yeah, I think that's a great comp. And so it'll be a lot of those, I think, short yardage, goal line, all of those stuff. Where it's like maybe like there's a little bit of pressure that goal line, I still think it might be a little mixed, but like if they're like short yardage, like at like the 40 or something, and they're already up by 2 scores, like yeah, I think we'll see Yassine in the mix there.
I'm actually curious. I wonder if we'll see that jumbo set that they kind of brought in towards the goal line last year. Obviously, different coaching staff, but potentially another jumbo set. Obviously, Syracuse football, quarterbacks wise, has not stayed healthy the entire season for the last 12 or 13 years. So the backup quarterback theoretically will have a high likelihood of playing at some point this season. I know you've kind of been following that backup quarterback battle. It's kind of been back and forth. We don't really know exactly necessarily who's going to be it yet, but what's kind of your gauge on that QB2 position?
Yeah, they're gonna put them both on the depth chart. That's my gauge. Is they're gonna put them with an or between their names on the depth chart.
Classic.
But it's going to be Michael Johnson who comes on the field first, comes on the field in a pinch. I do think Michael Johnson is more confident as a quarterback. I think he has a little bit better head on his shoulders. That's not like a diss to Carlos, but like just consistently in the past 3 years, like we've heard that maturity is a little bit of an issue for Carlos, and that's why I think some of the leadership aspects of the quarterbacking position aren't as easy for him, because like he has an arm, like he has the physical talent to play quarterback, but it's just like, and that's why I think when we see him in practice, it feels like there's such a disconnect from then when we see him in the games, because like the past 2 years, I'll be like, oh yeah, Carlos is looking great in practice. And even this year, like from what we've seen, like he looks pretty solid, but then you get him in a game situation and you're just like, what happened? What went wrong here? And so from what we've seen from Michael, it's a little more composed, it's a little more polished. Obviously he's a coach's kid, so he's been around the game for his entire life, and has been talking Steve and doing all that for his entire life. So I think they're both going to be on the depth chart just because Fran wants to continue to push them both, and because they're both guys who could be competing again next year for the starting role. But I think if Kyle McCord comes out in like a serious situation and not just in like, okay, week 1 against Ohio, we're up by 45 points, let's put a quarterback in, they're gonna go for Michael Johnson. I think would be would be my pick for who would go in there.
Switching now to the other side of the ball on the defense, switching formations, going away from the 3-3-5 to the 4-2-5. What have you seen from that and how they've adjusted?
Yeah, well, I think the biggest adjustment has been for the linebackers, right? Like that secondary is pretty much doing similar jobs, save for Justin Barron, who's cheating down a little bit more and playing more like a linebacker in his new star position. But we've heard a lot from like Derek McDonald about how they're playing a lot more. Oh God, I'm gonna mix them up in my head, so I'm not gonna say it. But they're just playing different than they had to last year, because there are 4 down linemen in front of them, right? And so I think the run defense is going to be a lot stronger than we've seen it in the past 2 years, not just because there's more bodies up there, but because they're bigger. And that's not like an affront to Kevon Darden, who was their sack leader last year, but it's just easier to stop the run when you're a little bit bigger and going against offensive linemen who tend to be 300 plus pounds, and just as tall as you are. So the defensive line and the linebackers is really where a lot of this defense has changed. And one thing we talked about in camp is that like the linebackers have really spent a lot of time like going over pretty like methodical stuff and Derek McDonald kind of pushed back and was like, we do fast stuff in practice. But I was like, Derek, I watched you for 20 minutes today, just like running around trash cans. Like, it's like talking through plays. So they've put a lot of time into kind of learning the new differences with how they have to like read plays and where they have to move based on having 4 guys in front of them instead of 3. So I think that'll be the position probably where people notice maybe the biggest difference is just in kind of like what their role is there and how they're playing the ball.
I find this defense interesting because obviously it's a slight switch from the 3-3-5 to the 4-2-5. New defensive coordinator. We have a lot of veteran guys that have been at Syracuse before at the linebacker position, both Marlowe and Derek. And then even at the safety spot with Deuce coming back, you still have Elijah Clark and Justin Barron. How important do you think the veteran nature of this team, both people that have been there, you can throw in Fadil Diggs, that is a veteran coming over from Texas A&M with Elijah Robinson. How important do you think that veteran nature is to potentially how good this defense can be, especially quickly in the season?
Oh, I mean, I think it's huge, right? Because the defense has been the best part of Syracuse for the past 2 seasons, and you've retained a lot of that personnel that's made it the best. Like it's tough, I know, because like you're thinking back to last season, you're like, well, they got blown out by like 40 points by 3-4 teams in a row, 5 teams in a row. But again, it's like that's because they had to be on the field for 70 minutes, like every game. Like they're playing like more than anyone else because the offense could never string together a drive that was more than 3 plays. And so naturally, just like the wear and tear gets to a point that you can't manage it. So like, I think if things had been more balanced the past 2 years, like this would have been a really talked about defense. One thing I've said in a couple other places is like, I think this is a year that some of those guys like Marlowe and Justin and Elijah Clark like get a bit more national attention that I think they would have been justified of getting last year. I think they're going to finally get that this year because hopefully they're going to have a little bit easier of a time. But yeah, I mean, I think the veteran nature is huge. I mean, the one place you're kind of lacking the veterans is the D line. Obviously, Fidil's like a veteran in age, but it is new in the program. I think both the defensive tackles are going to be transfers. I think it's looking like Dion Wilson and then Isaiah Hastings. Then you have Dennis, who like, yes, I think qualifies as a veteran at this point, but has like missed half of each of the past 2 seasons with injuries. So like that gets a little tricky, but having Marlowe right there behind that defensive line, I think helps balance that a little bit and kind of relieves some of the newcomers. But yeah, I mean, the veteran part is huge. I think that's going to play a huge part in this defense being able to get going really fast and just have an easy time. And especially some of those early season games that matter, right? Like Georgia Tech, Stanford, those types of games.
Outside of those big veteran guys on the defensive end, is there someone you think is going to emerge? Maybe they're a freshman, maybe they're a transfer that, no one really knows their name, but they're going to stand out on that defensive end once they start playing.
Yeah, one name we've heard of a lot, and I've seen some good things from in practice is Murad Watson. He was one of those guys that Fran flipped, or I don't know if he flipped him, but he got him in at the last minute in that recruiting class at the end of last year. And his name has popped up a lot. King Joseph's name has popped up a lot as well. I think he will see time, but I don't necessarily see him like being on the depth chart. But he'll see time. I think those are probably the big 2, especially at that defensive line position. Chase Simmons, that's a guy that has been on the team, but has been injured, and we've heard a little bit more about him. I think he's probably a depth chart pick that people might be like surprised by or might be like, oh, I forgot Chase Simmons was around, but we've seen a little bit more out of him. So I think Chase would be my this is a guy that's actually probably going to contribute a lot. And then Murad and King Joseph would be ones that come in maybe in some late game scenarios or in a pinch when they need them.
Yeah, I think King Joseph could make his money this year, especially in the pass rush situations. Gives him kind of one thing to think about, get to the quarterback. It makes it a little bit easier on the true freshman. Switching over to the defense really quick, not the defense, the schedule really quick. nationally wise, it's not the most hard schedule in the country. You just got some interesting games on it. What is a game or two that you're eyeing as crucial for the Syracuse season going forward?
I mean, crucial. I think it's that Georgia Tech game, which sounds silly maybe as week 2, but like Georgia Tech is a little bit better team than I think people think they are. They're not as crazy as some of the other ones, or I'm not necessarily as high on them as some of the other ones we can talk about in a minute. But having a conference game in week 2, like that is really a tone setter in a much different way than like opening conference play in week 4 or 5 is. And so having them at home, having that be so early in the season, like Syracuse needs to come out and like win that game and like be like, hey, yes, we can win conference games like even this early in the season. And then they have Stanford right after that, right? They have a bye in between, but they have Stanford right after. So I think getting out to 2 conference wins early is the crucial part of the schedule, right? I mean, they only had 2 conference wins last year. So if you can match that in your first 4 weeks of the season, like that would be pretty good. And then they have some other winnable conference games from there. And then some other conference games that, I don't think look as winnable. And I think people are kind of underestimating. But yeah, I think those first 2 conference games are kind of the crucial ones in this season.
When I take a look at the schedule, I'm most concerned about the October 12th to November 9th run, where there's only one home game, and it's all those ACC teams where last season that was the part of the schedule where the team completely collapsed. Are you worried about that this year?
Yes, not about a full collapse, but I mean, I think people, at least like Syracuse fans generally, don't seem to recognize that like NC State and Virginia Tech are both going to be very good football teams this year and probably will push for championship spots, or be right up there in the top 5. Pitt, it all depends on how Nargisi responds to what happened last season. And I think it could go like dramatically in either direction with them. Like they could come roaring back and be really good, or they could just kind of have another tough year where maybe they add another win or 2, but it's not anything too special. The other interesting thing about the Pitt game is Syracuse does always seem to have like a little bit of trouble there for whatever reason. Playing in a bigger stadium that does not get really packed. You're outdoors, obviously. That late in the year, it is going to be cold in Pittsburgh. So that one, I'm not concerned about yet. Check back in with me in 5 weeks once Pitt's played some games and I have a better read about what's going on with them. And then, like Boston College, I think they're going to be fine. Boston College is another team with a new head coach. And we haven't heard too much about BC. Like, I don't think that's going to be too difficult. I think the Cal game could be more difficult. That's a team with some weapons on it. I mean, Jaden Ott, I think, is projected to be the number 2 back in the conference and pretty highly rated in the country this year. So also they have to deal with going to the West Coast, which they have a little bit of a test with Vegas, but that will still be a little bit of trouble. So there are definitely some concerns in there. I think SU should file a grievance with the ACC for having 2 years in a row.
Yes, I agree.
They go 4 or 5 weeks without a home
Yeah.
game. I'm going to file a grievance with the ACC because it sucks to not have a weekend at home in a month. But yeah, I think that's like potentially a stretch where you could go solidly 2-2. If you throw the Cal game in there, like I think Cal could go either way. So it could be 3-2, it could be 2-3, and they might upset Virginia Tech or NC State. But those teams are pretty solid and have a lot of the same personnel that they were successful with last year. And I think Virginia Tech whooped Syracuse last year. So
Yeah, depending on the records, potential college game day, Virginia Tech, Syracuse at home.
Yeah, that would be my pick. That would be my pick.
Yeah, and you mentioned Cal and Jaden Ott. Syracuse's rush defense, the potentially improved rush defense, going to be tested by him and Kyron Drones, the running quarterback for Virginia Tech, and potentially Grayson McCall for NC State. No, he can move around a little bit as well. One quick one before we let you go: the Dome's getting the new seats. I know you've probably seen pictures on Twitter. But you excited for the new seat back seating in the dome?
I mean, obviously we don't sit in the seat back seating. Well, okay, I'll take that back. I usually go down before games and will like sit like before the doors open and just get closer, because it is nice to just like see everyone up close, and it's also like a nice centering moment. So I will have a nice taste of the seats about an hour before doors open on Saturday, and I will report out how comfortable they are. But I mean, yeah, I really don't have like a ton of time in the dome where I haven't been in the press box. I went to the Springsteen concert in whatever month that was, April, and was up in the 300s, and that was pretty uncomfortable. So those people up there should be very happy that they have seat backs now. But I think if you were in the bleachers, like it's probably not going to be too crazy of a difference for you, especially if you had like the seat backs, like the little portable ones. But it looks much nicer. I think it's much nicer to have the navy in there than the glaring aluminum seats. And I think maybe the plastic will make the sound better than the aluminum too.
Yep.
Maybe it won't be as echoey and kind of annoying in there. It's super loud.
I don't know if you're planning on going to the Pink concert, but I know Brent is. Maybe we'll have to have Brent report back to what the concert like seating is at the Pink concert in October. But you know, before we let you go, where can people find all your coverage throughout the entire football season?
You can find it on Syracuse.com or in the Post Standard if you happen to be a Prince subscriber still. And then you can find me on X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it, at Leiker.
Make sure to check out Emily's profile, extensive profile on Fran Brown. It's a great read. It takes a second, but it's a great read. Gets pretty much all you need to know about Fran Brown before the upcoming football season. You definitely want to check that out. Thanks again for taking the time, Emily.
Thanks for having me, you guys.